One night, she leaned closer and whispered, "Want me to tell you what women really want?" And that question changed everything I thought I knew about love, desire, and the quiet ache of being truly seen. The first time I met Laura was on a soft, golden afternoon in early spring. I was just visiting my college friend Daniel, nothing more. We'd spent the day fixing his old motorbike, grease under our nails, laughter echoing off the walls of his family's quiet house. When the door opened and she appeared, his mother, I froze for just a second longer than I should have. Laura wasn't what I expected. There was something effortlessly composed about her, the kind of presence that fills a room without needing to say much. Her hair was loosely tied back, a few strands falling across her cheek, and her smile, it wasn't forced. It was the kind of smile that makes you feel seen, even when you're trying not to be noticed. She greeted me with warmth that didn't feel practiced. "You must be Ollie," she said, her tone carrying a softness that made my name sound gentler. I nodded awkwardly, mumbling something polite. She just smiled wider, stepping aside. "Come in. You boys look like you could use something cold." The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon and fresh bread. Light spilled through the wide window, glinting off the glass pitcher she lifted from the counter. As she poured iced tea, I couldn't help watching how calm her movements were, graceful, deliberate, like she was always in quiet conversation with the world around her. When she handed me a glass, her fingers brushed mine, just for a moment. It wasn't intentional, or maybe it was, but that small contact seemed to hum under my skin longer than it should have. We talked about simple things, studies, hometowns, the noise of city life. But her questions weren't small talk. They carried weight, intention. "So," she asked, tilting her head slightly, "what do you really want to do after all this?" It wasn't the kind of question people usually ask, not with that kind of interest. I hesitated before answering, realizing no one had asked me that so directly in a long time. When I finally left that evening, Daniel was laughing about something, but I barely heard him. My mind kept replaying the light in Laura's eyes, that quiet kindness, that patience. As I walked home, the evening air felt different. I caught myself smiling for no reason, her voice echoing faintly in my head. And I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of everything. The visits became routine after that, casual, harmless. At least, that's what I told myself. Daniel and I worked on his projects, played music, wasted hours talking about nothing. But somehow, every time I came over, Laura was there, moving through the house like a quiet rhythm I began to anticipate. Sometimes, she'd be in the kitchen when I arrived, humming softly to an old song on the radio, her hair loosely falling over her shoulders. Other times, she'd be reading by the window, sunlight brushing against her skin. She always looked up when she heard my voice, always smiled. It was never more than that, but something about the way she looked at me felt grounding. "Ollie," she'd say, like my name carried some kind of warmth she enjoyed holding on to. It started with small moments, the way her fingers lingered a second too long when she passed me a cup of coffee, or how her laughter seemed to draw me in before I realized it. Once, when I reached for a plate, our hands touched briefly, and the faintest spark ran through me. She didn't move away immediately, just smiled, that calm, knowing smile that said more than words could. I began noticing details. How she'd tuck a strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking. How she bit her lower lip slightly when reading something serious. How her perfume, soft, floral, almost nostalgic, lingered in the air long after she left the room. And sometimes, when she talked, I forgot to answer. She noticed, of course. "You drift off a lot," she teased one afternoon, tilting her head. "Do I talk too much?" I shook my head quickly. "No. I didn't finish." She smiled again, like she knew the words I couldn't say. The truth was, it wasn't what she said, it was how she was. Gentle without being fragile. Strong without being distant. Every gesture seemed to carry meaning, even when it shouldn't. One evening, Daniel went out to take a phone call, leaving me and Laura alone at the table. She was slicing fruit, and I offered to help. Our hands moved close, brushing occasionally. Every light touch felt louder than the ticking clock on the wall. She caught my glance and didn't look away. "You're quiet tonight," she said softly. I smiled faintly. "Just, comfortable, I guess." She nodded, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly. "That's good. Comfort is rare." And just like that, the silence between us stopped feeling empty, it started feeling like something shared. It happened on an evening that felt quieter than most. The house was half-lit, the air cool from the soft rain outside. Daniel had gone out to grab food, leaving me and Laura alone in the living room. The television murmured faintly in the background, but neither of us was really listening. She sat across from me, curled slightly into the corner of the sofa, a book resting closed in her lap. Her bare feet were tucked beneath her, a simple gray sweater hanging loosely on her shoulders. She looked peaceful, but her eyes, when they met mine, carried that same unreadable warmth that always made me forget what I meant to say. We talked about simple things at first: work, the weather, the way rain made the city quieter. But the conversation drifted, slowly, into something deeper. She asked about my family, my plans, what I wanted out of life. I hesitated. For once, I didn't give my usual half-answers. I told her the truth, how I often felt like I was waiting for my life to start, like I was living in the pauses between decisions. She listened, really listened, without interrupting. The kind of listening that makes silence feel like safety. After a long pause, she leaned a little closer, her voice lowering to a whisper. "Want me to tell you what women really want?" The question caught me completely off guard. Her tone wasn't teasing. It was quiet, almost thoughtful, like she was about to share a secret, not advice. I nodded slowly. Her eyes softened. "They want to be seen," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Not for how they look or what they give. Just, seen. Noticed in the small ways that remind them they still matter." The room felt heavier suddenly, not in a bad way, but like her words had reached somewhere deep inside me. She looked away, almost shyly, as if she hadn't meant to say it out loud. "I think everyone wants that," I said quietly. She smiled faintly, still looking at the floor. "Maybe. But women forget it first." The silence after that was fragile, soft, but full. I wanted to say something, anything, but all I could do was watch her. The light from the window traced the curve of her cheek, the calm rise and fall of her breath. When Daniel returned, laughter and noise filled the space again. But something between us had shifted, invisible, unspoken, and impossible to ignore. That whisper stayed with me, echoing long after the rain stopped. After that evening, something changed, quietly, but unmistakably. I couldn't look at Laura the same way again. The whisper she'd shared kept replaying in my mind, over and over, like a song stuck between meaning and memory. When I saw her after that, every small thing felt amplified, the way she said my name, the light pressure of her hand on my arm when she laughed, even the sound of her footsteps in the hallway. It was as if my senses had learned her without my permission. I tried to brush it off. Told myself it was just admiration, respect, curiosity, anything but what it really was. For a while, I stayed away. Daniel asked if I was busy, and I said yes, too quickly. But eventually, life pulled me back. One quiet Sunday, I stopped by, telling myself it was just to return a charger I'd borrowed. She was in the garden when I arrived, kneeling beside a patch of roses, gloved hands covered in soil. The sunlight caught in her hair, and for a second I forgot why I'd come. When she looked up, she smiled like she'd been expecting me. "You disappeared," she said, not accusingly, just matter of fact. "Just, been busy," I murmured. She nodded, glancing back at the flowers. "We all hide behind that word sometimes." We ended up sitting on the low stone wall by her garden. The air was filled with the scent of jasmine and earth, the kind of quiet that makes you notice every breath. She told me about her past, how she'd married young, how the house sometimes felt too large since her divorce, how silence could be both comforting and cruel. Her voice was calm, but beneath it, I heard something fragile, the echo of loneliness. Without thinking, I said softly, "You don't seem like someone who'd ever be alone." She gave a small, almost sad smile. "Everyone seems strong until you notice where they're tired." For a moment, neither of us moved. A leaf brushed my shoulder, and when she reached to flick it away, her fingertips lingered, a whisper of touch that seemed to ask something neither of us could name. The air felt heavy, almost trembling with things unsaid. I wanted to say something, anything, but instead, we just sat there, side by side, the garden fading slowly into evening. And in that silence, I realized, something between us had quietly crossed a line, though neither of us had stepped over it. For a while, I tried to convince myself that whatever was happening between us was just in my head. It had to be. She was my friend's mother, kind, wise, beautiful, yes, but not someone I was supposed to think about when the world went quiet. Yet, the more I tried to ignore it, the more her absence pressed against me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Daniel joked about it one day, completely unaware of the truth buried beneath his words. "Mom really likes having you around," he said, grinning. "You're her favorite audience, I swear." I laughed along, but the sound felt wrong in my throat. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words had stirred something sharp, guilt, confusion, longing, all tangled together. I decided to stay away for a while, hoping the distance would help me think clearly again. Weeks passed. I threw myself into work, into noise, into anything that didn't remind me of her voice or the smell of her kitchen after rain. But every now and then, I'd catch myself scrolling through old messages, half expecting to see her name. Then, one evening, a message appeared, short, simple, and somehow enough to undo all my efforts. "Haven't seen you in a while. Are you okay?" I stared at it for minutes before replying, "Just busy." Her response came quickly, "Busy can be lonely sometimes." I didn't answer after that, but my heart did, loud, persistent, impossible to ignore. A few days later, I saw her again, by accident. I'd gone to a small cafe downtown to meet a client, and she was there, sitting by the window, reading. Her hair was slightly messy, her glasses perched low on her nose, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. She looked real. Not the polished image I'd built in my mind, but softer, more human, and even more beautiful for it. She noticed me before I could decide whether to walk away. Her lips curved into a small, genuine smile, not surprised, not forced, just warm. I hesitated, then walked over. "Hi," I managed. "Hi," she replied, her voice calm, familiar. "You look tired." "Trying not to be," I said, smiling faintly. We talked for only a few minutes, but it felt like time had folded in on itself, the distance I'd tried to build melting quietly away. When I left, I could still feel her gaze on me, gentle, forgiving, and somehow asking me to stay, even without a word. It was raining the next time I saw her, one of those soft, steady rains that makes everything feel slower, more thoughtful. I hadn't planned to visit, not really. I was passing by her street, and before I knew it, my hands had turned the steering wheel toward her house. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. Laura opened the door with that same quiet surprise that always disarmed me. She was wearing a cream sweater and had her hair tied loosely, a few damp strands falling against her cheek. "Ollie," she said softly, almost like she'd been expecting me. "Come in before you get soaked." Inside, the house smelled like coffee and rain. The windows fogged slightly from the warmth, blurring the world outside. She handed me a towel, then a mug, her fingers brushing mine just long enough to make my chest tighten. We sat near the large window, the rain painting slow patterns down the glass. For a while, neither of us spoke. There was no need. The silence between us had its own language now. She broke it first. "You've been quiet lately," she said, her voice light but edged with something careful. "Is everything all right?" I looked down at the mug in my hands. Steam curled upward, and I watched it fade. I didn't know what to say, I admitted. Her brow furrowed slightly. "About what?" I hesitated, long enough for my pulse to trip over itself. Then I said it, softly, almost like a confession to myself. "You've been on my mind more than I want to admit." The words hung there, fragile and trembling. For a second, I wished I could pull them back, but her expression didn't change. She simply inhaled, slow and steady, then set her cup down. "Ollie," she said finally, her tone gentle but sure, "you remind me what it feels like to be noticed. Not out of pity or expectation. Just seen. It's been a long time since I felt that." Her hand moved toward mine, hesitating only for a breath before resting gently over it. Her touch was warm, steady, real. I didn't move. I couldn't. We sat like that, saying nothing, the rain whispering softly around us. It wasn't a confession that demanded anything, no promises, no drama, just truth shared between two people who'd crossed paths at the right and wrong time all at once. When I finally left, the scent of rain and her perfume clung to me. It wasn't passion that burned, it was something quieter, deeper. The kind of feeling that lingers, asking for nothing except to be remembered. Time, as it always does, moved on. Life began pulling me in a new direction, a job offer in another city, the kind of opportunity one couldn't ignore. Still, as the days before my departure dwindled, an unspoken weight settled over me. It wasn't excitement or fear, it was the quiet ache of knowing something precious was about to end. I hadn't told Laura yet. Part of me didn't want to. Saying it out loud would make it real. But the night before I was supposed to leave, I found myself standing on her doorstep again, the sky dimming into a soft violet dusk. She opened the door and smiled, that same calm, knowing smile. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said. Inside, everything felt familiar, the faint scent of jasmine, the muted hum of the refrigerator, the warmth of the living room light. I realized then how deeply her house had become tied to a feeling I couldn't name. "I got a job offer," I said quietly, forcing the words out. "I'm leaving tomorrow." For a moment, she didn't answer. She just looked at me, really looked, with that same searching gaze that had first made me feel seen months ago. Then she nodded, her smile soft but steady. "That's wonderful, Ollie. You deserve it." Her words were kind, but there was a flicker in her eyes, something tender, restrained, almost proud and sad at once. We talked for a while, like we always did, about nothing and everything. How the rain had ruined her garden last week. How the neighborhood had grown quieter. The conversation floated easily, but beneath it, there was a tension neither of us mentioned. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. The night air was cool, a faint wind moving through the trees. I turned to thank her, but before I could speak, she reached out, her fingers resting lightly on my sleeve. "You already know what women really want," she said softly. "Because you gave it, without realizing." Her words hit me harder than I expected, gentle, but final. She stepped closer, pressed a light kiss against my cheek, and for that brief moment, everything went still. Her touch wasn't about longing, it was gratitude, warmth, and a quiet kind of love that didn't need to be claimed to be real. When I walked away, I didn't look back, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't have to. Some goodbyes aren't endings. They're promises, to carry what was pure, unspoken, and unforgettable into whatever comes next. If this story touched something in you, that quiet space between love and understanding, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes real connection doesn't always need words. Speech balloon, tell me in the comments, do you think love like this should be pursued, or protected from ever happening? Your thoughts make these stories come alive. Red heart, stay with me for the next slow burn journey, where hearts speak softly, but the echoes